Welcome to my presentation on IC and IC. In this interdisciplinary work between cybersecurity, human-computer interaction, and psychology, we present a mixed methods approach to study human problem-solving processes in hardware reverse engineering. Embedded microelectronics in the form of microchips are the backbone of our digital society these days, and we trust these devices across residential, commercial, and industrial applications. An attacker might now try to subvert their security through manipulations called hardware trojans, or to infringe intellectual property contained in a microchip. And those threats have recently been receiving more and more attention both from academic researchers and from policymakers. The central technique in this domain is hardware reverse engineering, or short HRE. It's deployed both for attacks on and for the protection of microchips. In previous work, we've established a model of this technique. On the one side, you find the technical part, where the reverse engineer runs a combination of both manual and semi-automated analyses. And then on the other side, you find the cognitive processes of the reverse engineer and their strategies, which steer the analysis. And while there exists research on the former, reverse engineer strategies and crucial cognitive factors remain poorly understood, even to date. To observe and assess such strategies, we require sound and valid empirical research methods, and that includes both quantitative and qualitative approaches. For example, one may use eye tracking and Think Aloud. Unfortunately, though, their implementation in the area of hardware reverse engineering is still little evaluated. And thus, our overarching research goal with this work is to implement and evaluate the use of eye tracking and Think Aloud methods to assess problem-solving behavior and strategies in the field of HRE. Before we approach our research methods, let's first take a closer look at how hardware reverse engineering is performed. HRE usually starts with a microchip, a piece of silicon, and that can implement one or several functions. That might, for example, be a cryptographic algorithm, a general-purpose processor, or a communication interface. And the goal of the attacker is now to understand this circuit at least partially. And to this end, they extract a circuit diagram, the so-called netlist, from the chip. Such a digital netlist consists of a high number, often millions, of components, which are also called gates, and their interconnections. And here we can see a small snippet from a larger netlist. And the goal of the reverse engineer is now to make sense of this so-called unstructured sea of gates. And even though tools exist which can partially assist human analysts during HRE, their success still heavily depends on the reverse engineer's experience, skills, and their cognitive abilities. And for example, HRE problem solving requires frequent re-evaluation of assumptions as soon as a circuit's property, for example, one of its inputs, changes. And therefore, HRE represents a specific human-computer interaction setting in which humans perform computer-aided problem solving, making use of digital visualizations. And this phenomenon is not exclusive to hardware security. Similar application areas can be found in design engineering and in medicine. In fact, we encounter the practice of reverse engineering in general in many places. It's a common problem-solving approach when people have to find and process information that is not intuitively accessible, for example, because an interface might not be well designed, is not available because it is expert knowledge, or information might even be lost due to poor documentation, or intentionally hidden, for example, in the case of dark patterns. And our methodological findings may therefore be used to inform studies in those above cases and hence be applied in various HCI contexts, also beyond hardware reverse engineering. In order to evaluate the research methods and participants' problem-solving behavior in a standardized environment, we make use of an interactive simulation environment, which is called ReverseSim. This is an abstraction of real-world HRE, which our lab has developed based on expert recounts of reverse engineering behavior. You can see an example task here. In this task, participants have to light up the light bulb and turn off the warning sign on the right, which equals a binary output of the circuit in the center of 1 and 0. And therefore, the problem that needs solving is that one has to understand, that is, reverse engineer, the circuit in the middle to identify the correct positions for the switches on the left, which serve as the inputs to this circuit. Next to the center of the circuit, you can also see an ink blot, and this partially obscures one of the circuit's components. And this situation can actually arise in real-world HRE settings, where it's then sometimes necessary to figure out what component is hidden here. And this obstacle increases the difficulty of this task, and we are then interested in identifying how reverse engineers either find the underlying component or work their way around it. When we observe participants applying reverse engineering strategies, we can apply a broad range of research methods. Since hardware reverse engineering is a very visually demanding task, we consider eye tracking to be a particularly promising technique. And it can provide us with precise information about the participant's gaze path, and it's telling us, for example, how long certain components are being focused. Unfortunately, though, eye tracking tells us very little about the reasoning of participants or the problems they encounter. And therefore, we further assess participants' problem-solving approaches by asking them to verbalize their thoughts. And this method is called Think Aloud. Thought protocols can either be used during the task itself or retrospectively. And then from Think Aloud, we can learn a lot about participants' reasoning, that is, the how and why of reverse engineering, and we can annotate those insights on the thought protocols as seen on the right side. The drawback of this method is, nevertheless, that it often lacks the accuracy as to which components of the circuit are being referred to exactly. In this study, we decided to combine both methods to overcome this challenge. And this provides us with an even more comprehensive insight into hardware reverse engineering problem solving. When implementing and evaluating the two methods in HRE, we were guided by 4 research questions. First, we investigated eye tracking by itself, asking whether fixations obtained from eye tracking can be used to observe behaviors within HRE problem solving. And to ensure the methodological soundness of combining this method with Think Aloud, RQ2 and RQ3 called for an extensive evaluation to ensure that this combination still produces high-quality data and that it also doesn't negatively impact participant study experience. Our results may be used as a robust base for studies using those methods, also outside of HRE. To stay within the time of this presentation, I'd like to refer the interested listener to our paper here, but overall our investigation has confirmed that this method is applicable without adverse effects. And hence, in the light of RQ4, we then developed an innovative technique that allows us to complement Think Aloud and eye tracking. And to answer our research questions, we implemented an experimental design. Our data analysis here is based on 41 participants, 59% of whom were male, and our sample was on average 24 years old and well educated. First, participants answered a questionnaire on their prior knowledge related to reverse engineering, as well as on their educational and professional background. Then participants completed a tutorial for a simulation and subsequently worked on several tasks, such as the one I showed earlier. And throughout this time, we used Think Aloud and eye tracking to capture their behavior. Finally, participants also answered a post-survey on their experiences and any problems they might have encountered during the task. In the following, I will present the results of our methodological evaluation. Let's focus on eye tracking first. Here you see the reverse engineering task within our simulation. I have now picked out one single participant from our dataset, and I will now show you how they worked on the task. First, we can replay all of the annotations they made. More importantly though, we can take a look at the eye tracking data captured during problem solving. The highlighted areas indicate the proportion of visual attention. We can observe how the participant focused primarily on gates and wire intersections and little on the inputs and outputs or the surrounding space. We can also clearly see the peak focus of this participant on the component obscured by the ink blot. To make a broader statement about how reverse engineers navigate this circuit, it's beneficial to move to a quantitative perspective. This plot clearly shows that we observed elevated attention on the obscured gate across most participants. And this result matches our expectation that visual features that stand out receive major attention, showing that our method can indeed accurately capture and quantify visual attention in our simulation environment. In fact, eye tracking can provide us with even more detailed information. The heat map conveys spatial information, but it does lack a temporal dimension. This data is needed though if we like our method to be able to produce meaningful insight into reverse engineering strategies. To be able to effectively combine eye tracking and Think Aloud data, we therefore need to switch to a more powerful representation. In this work, we've used scan paths. With those, we are able to track the order in which participants visually focused particular circuit components and the exact point in time when this happened. We can then synchronize the annotated protocols from Concurrent Think Aloud with those scan paths. As a result, we obtain a sequence of behaviors and their exact location in both the spatial and temporal domain. Example behaviors could be forward tracking and backward tracking or speculation, and also a variety of others that we identified using Think Aloud. And this close integration of quantitative eye tracking data and qualitative Think Aloud data provides a level of detail for investigating such visually demanding HCI tasks, which was previously unavailable. Let me present a possible application. When we automate and repeat this step on the left for all participants in our sample, we can then aggregate this data into a statistical overview. For example, we can extract the prevalence of forward and backward tracking on the left and right side of our circuit. Our data here shows that participants tend to apply forward tracking more on the left side, whereas backward tracking is more prevalent on the right. And this finding is consistent with our expectations from expert interviews that we've conducted while developing our interactive simulation. In this case study, we have successfully identified and localized two fundamental HRE behaviors, and we reckon that this approach can also be extended to other phenomena. This brings me to the end of this presentation. Summing up, here are two main takeaways from this work. We have shown that eye tracking is suitable to capture reverse engineering, a visually demanding human-computer interaction task that is not limited to hardware security. Our approach combines the strengths of eye tracking with Think Aloud in a previously unseen way. Prior work has only used eye tracking as a visual cue during Think Aloud, helping participants remember, and others have used eye tracking to provide supporting qualitative context while annotating verbal thought protocols manually. Our work expands on those approaches by directly integrating qualitative Think Aloud protocols with quantitative and automated analysis of eye gaze. Beyond this presentation, our paper further covers the methodological intricacies of successfully combining eye tracking and Think Aloud within one experiment, and it includes additional case studies to this end. I invite you to take a look at the paper afterwards. Further research in this area may allow us to increase the degree of automation, and particularly for the annotation of verbal thought protocols, which will then enable studies with larger sample sizes. It may also be possible to reduce manual coding effort in Think Aloud by directly identifying some distinctive eye gaze patterns of some behaviors. And with this, I'd like to thank you very much for your attention. Please take a look in our paper, and if you have any thoughts or questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us via email or talk to us in person at CHI 2024.